Well, I'm super excited to have you here. I read your book a few months ago after it was recommended by one of our Balance members. And as soon as I read it, I like, oh my gosh, we have to have her on because you have basically tied like a lot of my fears and a lot of things that I see in other women, like holding them back to like something we just accepted as truth in the 7 deadly sins. So like okay, I'm super excited to get into it. Okay, first, like background knowledge. I was raised Catholic. I went to an Episcopalian school. So the 7 deadly sins really played prominently into everything I saw during my childhood. What first like really drew me into your book is your explanation of how the 7 deadly sins actually rose to prominence in religion. Can you tell us the story about the monk who went to like the island?
Yeah. I mean, the sins are so wild. As someone who, my father's Jewish, my mom calls herself a recovering Catholic, but I was raised in a almost completely secular household. I went to an Episcopalian high school as well. And so when I was first determining what is this goodness that is so pervasive in the lives of women, this quote unquote quote goodness that we're chasing, good mother, good friend, so on and so forth. Where did this even come from? And essentially that investigation led me to something that seemed quite culturally obvious, the 7 deadly sins. So then, of course, I'm like, where were they in the Bible? And that's when I realized that they weren't, which is shocking to most people. Shocking. They were never sort of handed down in the Old Testament or by Jesus as these edicts or rules. They actually first got sort of turned into in the 4th century, this monk named Evagrius Ponticus, an ascetic monk who fled to the desert after having an affair with a married woman. He was a wealthy man, and he wrote them down.
It's been going on for a long time, this behavior.
It's been going on for a long time, yes. And he wrote this little chapbook of prayer called Practicos, and they were bits of scripture to be used against, he called them demons, but it had a different connotation then as more of something that would distract you or keep you out of prayer. And there were 8 of them, including sadness, which I include in my book. And then, so he writes this little chapbook. Obviously, there weren't a lot of books flying around at that point. He's also, just for any Enneagram fans, an early father of the Enneagram as well, because that's when they became associated. Each Enneagram type is associated with a vice.
It is just like your whole. Okay, we have only been recording for 3 minutes, and my mind has already been blown.
I know,
repeatedly.
Right? Yeah,
repeatedly.
Could you see why I was so excited? Can you see?
Oh, I know. Joanne's been like a kid before Christmas. Like, oh my God, it's coming up.
Yeah. So he writes them down, and then they're passed amongst these desert fathers like John Cassian, etc. And then in 590 AD, Pope Gregory I turns them into the cardinal vices. He drops sadness, and they become the cardinal vices. And then Aquinas, they become part of sort of Catholicism very specifically, and are written about a lot. And I'm going to tell you the story of when this homily, when he creates them too. But he also is the Pope that lifted the edict on idolatrous religious art. So that's when you start to see all this religious art happening too, which is important. So in the New Testament, Mary Magdalene is written about as the one from whom Jesus cast 7 demons. And nobody ever says what those demons are. Again, that word has a slightly different connotation than how we interpret it in a modern way. Some theologians say he was balancing her chakras, which I like that interpretation. But there's nothing more that's... Hold on, I'm so sorry. Max, I'm recording.
We get it.
Moms will relate. Yeah. Summer. Oh, and now I have fighting cats.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Okay, this is the epitome of mom life, people.
My house.
This is mom life.
So that's how Mary Magdalene is referred to in the New Testament. And then Mary Magdalene fans will know that, and in the New Testament, she's referred to as the one to whom Jesus resurrects after he is crucified. And there's this beautiful heretical gospel, the Gospel of Mary, which is her recounting this first teaching, which is it's very beautiful. Anyway, that was destroyed, only recovered maybe a century ago. And she would really theoretically be the first apostle before Peter, if we follow this idea of sort of primacy of teaching. She was referred to as his best student, etc. So in 590, taking you back to Pope Gregory I in this homily, he says, these are the 7 cardinal vices. These are the same thing. These are the demons that Jesus cast out of Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene is the same woman who anoints Jesus's feet with her hair, different woman, but he says same woman, and that woman is a prostitute. And that's how Mary Magdalene earned the reputation as a penitent prostitute and then was painted as a penitent prostitute, clutching at Jesus as he is ascending. She's shown sort of in red, clutching. And she wore that reputation until the 80s, when the Pope at the time said, oh, she wasn't actually a prostitute. And then in 2016, Pope Francis said, oh, she was the apostle to the apostles. But really, imagine our
Catholic,
world.
I'm
Isn't
out
that
of
wild?
this. Like, this is the first I've heard this. I didn't know that they had like cleared her reputation.
I didn't know they cleared
clear
it
her
either,
reputation.
actually. It was not
you
very
guys
well
know
known
about-
in Catholic circles, like at all.
Yeah,
They did not talk about that. She was always the prostitute to me before I read your book. That's
Yes. Isn't that wild?
Mhm.
Meanwhile,
Okay.
like, besides Mother Mary, like the rightful first apostle.
Okay. I love the movie Dogma. Have either of you guys seen that movie?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
I
Well,
haven't.
good luck.
enjoy
I
that
mean,
one.
Harry Weinstein owns the rights, and so they won't stream it
Harvey,
and they won't make it on DVD anymore. I have a DVD copy, so next time you cross over to Arizona, come by my house. I'll let you watch it on DVD. But I digress. In it, they talk about how like there are no how biased the Bible is, and like how women are painted so terribly, and how there's not even a woman apostle in there and everything. So that what you said just blew my. I'm like, oh my god, wow.
No.
Women were actually far more prominent and very prominent in early Christianity too. There's Junia. Her name was later. Some people then translated her name and made her into a man. But
Not a shocker.
It's not. I mean, Jesus was actually, if you read him, like a feminist. But then when you look into the mistranslations of the Bible, there's this man. He wrote like misquoting Jesus. Bert. I think he used, what's his name? Is a professor, I want to say, at Princeton. But there are more mistakes in the sort of New Testament than there are words because of just translation errors. And then people at various times making it more anti-Semitic or making it misogynistic through translation. And
That is
pretty interesting.
It's just so wild how like the real history does not line up with like the history being told to us currently in like especially the evangelical Christian movement, how it's mostly like men are leading and women are subservient. It wasn't that way. It was like history was rewritten.
No, and
like,
it's really No, but there are also amazing women in that movement who I think are sort of becoming these really important leaders who either have left and have deconstructed their faith and reconstructed it in a much more sort of loving, intentional, original way, and also are sort of like poking holes in this idea of patriarchy as passed down by actual gospel. When you go back and you look, it's like, no, not so much.
Yeah, and how much is also tied to money? Like you said that he lifted this ban on religious icons and art. And like Brie and I, we went to Rome a few years ago and we went into the Vatican. And when you go into that, you just see the money in there that comes
it drips
to the church. Like it drips.
Or
Like
oozes.
everything
It oozes.
gilded.
That's a better way.
I my jaw dropped as a former Catholic seeing how like much money comes in to the church. And they use that too, right? They use the 7 deadly sins as a way to collect money for the church.
Yeah,
Is that
I mean,
right?
well,
Am I remember that right?
I'm not sure how it works sort of in the Vatican, but the Vatican is an extremely wealthy institution. And then you look at these mega churches like the Joel Osteens, these leaders, and it's pretty stunning. It's quite far from Jesus wandering around the desert with 12 people, no church, saying you don't need a church, like this is your church is, I'm not good at quoting gospel, but like this isn't exactly what he asked
envisioned
or this wasn't his goal. He rode around on a donkey.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to say, like, one of my favorite gifts I have bought for my daughter, and I wanted it for me, but they didn't have it in an adult size. Picture of Jesus, like in that typical Catholic, like, and it's like, and it said, "I never said that," and I
never
feel
said
like, I feel like that. I grew up Southern Baptist, and I just feel like there are so many things. No, that is not what they meant. That is so not what was meant.
That is not what he said.
Like, what you see now is not,
No. And yet I feel like people who deep Christians, and again, I wasn't raised I've never gone to church and I'm unaffiliated, but I love Jesus. I love Mary Magdalene. And I love, people like Father Richard Rohr, or they're just these incredible Christians who also are pushing really hard against the way that it's been politicized, the way that it is being brandished like a whip, particularly against the people that Jesus was ultimately trying to protect. And I don't know if you guys have seen that unbelievable encounter, someone taking on a woman, the person who's trying to get the 10 Commandments reinstated in schools.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyway, it's so beautiful. And he is essentially quoting scripture at her and talking about how essentially like evil this is and how anti-Christian. So I don't know. I hope that all the wonderful Christians will help us
raise above this.
Well, create some balance to go to
Well, I want to talk more about how having these 7 deadly sins in our lives has affected us as women today. And we're going to get into that right after that. So talking about the 7 deadly sins, Elise, like I mentioned, I went to an Episcopalian school, and it's funny because I was recently telling my mom this, and I'm like, Mom, did you know that in school they had us go to confession? And she's like, yeah, I knew that. I'm like, but did you know, like as a 3rd grader, they gave me a list of sins and they were numbered. And I remember that the list getting passed off, and then you just checked off the sins that you committed so that when you went and knelt behind the father who wasn't facing you, Father Eldridge, I remember. And he was like, tell me, child, how have you sinned? And I'm like, 1, 5, 6. That's how the confession went. Our school. Yeah, it started very early. It started in 3rd grade, 4th grade. Yeah, it was crazy. These sins have been a part of like my life, and I know so many women's lives for so long. And so when I was reading your book, the sin that first like really stuck out to me was envy.
Yes.
And how like envy is something that really stops us. And it's so hard for women to actually use envy to their good. So can you talk a little bit about envy and how we can like reuse it?
Yeah. Joanne, that's so wild. But this is, and it's in some ways it's like healthy that you have such an overt example in your life that you can point to, because I think for so many women it's far more insidious, where they would say, I don't believe in any of this stuff. I wasn't raised in a church. My parents didn't talk to me about sinning. This doesn't apply to me. But what's amazing about this list, I'm just going to say them quickly, and then let's talk about envy, sloth, pride, envy, greed, gluttony, lust, anger, and then sadness, which I write about as sort of what is happening to men. But you think about them and you're like, oh my God, this is a checklist of goodness, specifically for women. Men are not policing themselves according to these sins. They're just not. Men have no compunction, in my experience and in my immediate family, about feeling like they certainly deserve rest and they deserve a drink and some Netflix and some peace and some quiet, right? But whereas women are
feel like they deserve, yes.
Yeah. Women are like, I should just be doing something, and I'm going to like hover and sit for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to go and do something else. And there's all this doing that needs to be done. And moms in particular, but all women really have been trained well in subjugating their wants to other people's needs, which gets us to envy, which is, I was interviewing, this is a long time ago, but therapist Lori Gottlieb, who wrote this amazing book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. And she has this small aside in her book, which is that she tells her clients to pay attention to their envy because it shows them what they want. And this was before I had this idea for this book. And I was thinking about this and I was like, oh my God, it in two places very deeply. I couldn't stop thinking about this. And the first was, ooh, envy, gross. I would never, not me. I do not envy anyone. It's so malicious and icky. So of course I was like, oh, I must be runneth over with envy for me to have that much of a triggered response. And then second, I was like, I couldn't tell you what I want. I have no idea. I've been living my life on autopilot and I drive my life according to again, meeting the needs of other people, my two boys, my husband, my job.
You get told what you want.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I couldn't articulate it. I could not articulate it. And it freaked me out. And so then I realized, okay, if these two things are so related, then my envy is a guide. If it's a guide for what I want, then I need to start with sort of the unconscious apparatus of envy, which is the way that it shows up. I think particularly in women, again, because we've been conditioned not to have any wants at all. We don't know what's happening. This is an unconscious process. We see someone, typically another woman, who has something or is doing something that we want. We feel incredibly uncomfortable. She makes us feel bad. And the instinct is to say, she's making me feel bad. She is bad. And we project that bad feeling onto her. And so we start deprecating and criticizing and judging other women. And we say things like, I just don't like her. She rubs me the wrong way. Who does she think she is? When really it's why her and not me. And I would never allow myself to do that. And so therefore she should not do it too. And so we get into this terrible cycle of policing each other and making each other small. I write too about how envy is very correlated with pride. Being seen is very dangerous for women and scarcity, which is part of the greed chapter. But we recognize that once we become aware of it, you will see this pattern everywhere. And it is so socially condoned. And so what you do, you just notice and you're like, oh, she is making me so uncomfortable. There's so much information here. She is pointing to a dream I have for myself. This is my soul knocking. Like, what is present? Is it that I am envious of her body? Am I envious of her relationship or her well-behaved children who read books? Am I envious of her career? What is it? And you just start that process and you start training yourself to be comfortable with the discomfort, which then moves very quickly, by the way. And you don't have to make yourself feel bad by being terrible, being mean. And you get so much more information and insight into that wanting.
It's
so
one of the hardest things that we have these days, though, is being comfortable with that discomfort.
Yes.
Like,
I mean, we live in a culture of numbing.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think it's
as a society as a whole, like we're used to instant gratification and being able to do away with things. And like that's, as someone who's struggling with anxiety, being comfortable with the uncomfortable.
It's a process for sure. After I read the envy chapter, and it really keyed me into like, okay, when I have this feeling towards other women, I need to like dig into that a little bit more. So I'm just going to be very vulnerable right here. There's this other woman who I constantly tell Brie, she rubs me the wrong way. I can't stand her. What is she doing? Like, did it like everything. And when I looked into it, I was like, you know what? I am envious of something that she has. And also like when she says stuff that rubs me the wrong way, I'm actually a little envious that she actually says her own needs to me to make sure that she's taken care of, because that's something that I have trouble doing. I have trouble telling people exactly what I want and I think, because I'm afraid that they'll like disassociate from me. And I have to say, like, Elise, your book has helped me so much in that regard, because right before we got on this podcast, I was telling Brie about like this text thread I'm on with a lot of moms at my son's school. And we had a conversation at brunch because they went back to school already. It's July and they already went back to school on Wednesday.
Yeah. Modified
true
year
story.
round. I'll preface
true
it
story.
with that.
We had a brunch on Wednesday, and during that brunch, we were talking about mom guilt and like we really need to do more things for ourselves. And so one of the women was like, "Hey, I could discount tickets on like a baseball game," and like the whole thread was silent. And some were like, "Oh, I can't make it that weekend," and I just look at that and I'm like, I don't like baseball. Like, what did I do here?
was gonna
And
say.
I went forward and I'm like, hey, like I don't like baseball games and I fear I'm going to be grumpy if I go there, but I want to hang out. What can we do? And it was because of that little jaunt into envy, I was able to figure out, oh, this is something I want to be doing with my life and pushing that forward.
No, and that like going into the sensing too of because I think so many of us override our bodies. So in that moment too, as someone makes a plan to say, take a pause and say, how does this feel? Like, is my energy rising at this idea? Is this like a full body yes for me? Or is this like, no, thanks? And then acting on it, right? Because so often we override every part of our body that's like, no.
I like how you said that, a full body yes. Right?
Yes.
Like
full body
my head says yes, but why is my stomach upset and my palms sweaty? Right?
Yeah. Or even like my head says, you should do this, or like you need to do this, or this is the right thing to do. And of course, many of us, particularly moms, are doing stuff all day that's not a full body yes. But even acknowledging that and saying, I know I don't want to do this, but like my kids need lunch, so I'm going to make some lunch, is a more honoring approach than I'm in a cell and I'm going to just, I don't care what I want. Who cares?
And be grateful I have these kids and this wonderful house and like all those things. I think it also ties into our likability, which like with another sin that actually comes right after envy, because I took notes on your book, Elise. I took all the notes because I want to talk with you more about pride, and especially how you talk about Anne Hathaway versus Jennifer Lawrence's acceptance speeches in your book. And we're going to get into that right after this. So pride, another of the sins we've grown accustomed. Like, we shouldn't brag about ourselves. We shouldn't like show that we're proud of our accomplishments. You have just the example of how our society sees women and pride with an Oscars acceptance speech. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So we all know, we've all been admonished to be humble. Don't get a big head. Don't be a tall poppy in a poppy field. You will lose your head. For women, this idea of standing out from a crowd is very dangerous. And we see this play out in our culture all the time. And it happens all the time, very visibly with celebrities, but it also happens with female founders. It happens in small communities where we watch a woman. We tend to celebrate a woman until she reaches a certain point where we decide collectively there's a shift of she's had enough, no more. She needs to be put back in her place. And then we destroy
Elizabeth
women.
Holmes for the
Yes, all over the place. And we all feel this hit of schadenfreude, which is joy plus harm. And we think, oh, she deserved it. And who did she think she was? You know, these are all cultural scripts that we have completely ingrained. And we're like, they're famous. Who cares? And then we sort of buy the merch when they have their comeback tour, #Free Britney. And are like, God, the media, you know, but we are all participating in it. But this doesn't happen to men. Okay. This is specifically happening to women. And it's all this reputational harm and deciding that someone's quote unquote, like not a good person typically, or toxic. I mean, you see these assaults on someone all the time. I think this is why Taylor Swift has endured, is she has a whole army of people who will come after you. They know what's up, even if it's not a conscious thing, and they are going to protect her from this cycle. But I'm sure it happens to her too. All right. So I wrote about, there's so many examples, and I'm sure people listening are like, oh yeah. But I wrote about this particular moment in time when Anne Hathaway was nominated for an Oscar for Les Mis. And Jennifer Lawrence, I think it was Silver Linings Playbook. Jennifer Lawrence was this young ingenue who was on her way up, and we'd had enough of Anne Hathaway. And there were all these haters, is what they were called, who just snarked at her for her earnestness. And she was trying too hard, ladies, and so grating. I don't remember. I mean, I'm sure people listening can remember sort of the general hate of Anne Hathaway.
I don't remember the words, but I do remember that vibe. Very much so.
Yes.
Again, I'm so tired of her.
Go away, Anne Hathaway. I mean, it's wild when you think about it, right?
It is.
And so in this moment, it's like accepts an Oscar. She's wearing this cone boob dress that she apparently had to switch into because someone else was wearing the dress that she was supposed to wear. And she's cradling, she wins the Oscar. She's cradling it. She feels so awkward and everyone in the world hates her. And she says something to the effect of, oh, it came true. And
I remember this speech.
This
yes.
dream. Yeah. And
it came true. Yeah.
It came
Looking for
true.
Oscar.
And this, yeah. And she just got destroyed for the dress, for just being so cringy. And we didn't really hear from her from a while. She's sort of now, this is so many years ago, now is sort of, people can reflect on it and say, why were we so mean to Anne Hathaway? But like sent her into kind of hiding. And then meanwhile, Jennifer Lawrence was like tripping and falling down the stairs and so real. And I mean, I really like Jennifer Lawrence. So, but like we just couldn't get enough of Jennifer Lawrence at that moment. And then since destroyed her, she reached that sort of apex and then came tumbling down the other side. But this is just a pattern. And so I think for all of us listening, it's important to be like, oh, I am participating in this unconscious sort of mob pattern. And I could say it doesn't really relate to me because like I'm not famous and I'm not rich and who cares? And these women don't deserve our sympathy. But what we miss in that is that this is a playbook. We are all learning. Our daughters are learning. Don't be seen, not be celebrated. It is dangerous. They will come for you. And this is happening. This happens.
It's interesting that you mentioned Taylor Swift in this because my daughter's a huge Swiftie and she has brought me into it. So I know a ton about Taylor Swift, more than I ever thought I would actually. And I really, really admire her and like her.
If I ever get taken to a Taylor Swift trivia night, you're coming with me.
Oh yeah, I will come. I'll come. But something about Taylor Swift is you said like she has an army to protect her, but even I think she may have broken the pattern because they came after her as well. Right after 1989, it was the whole Kanye West backlash. And like he had his whole audience go like F Taylor Swift, and she totally disappeared. And I feel like she's the one who broke the pattern because she's like, forget you all. I am posting an album. Like it was a complete diss track album, Reputation, where I am telling people like, I don't care. This is how it is. She came out and she's like, there will be no explanation. There will just be Reputation. She refused to do any press on the album whatsoever. And she just came back fiery right after it instead of disappearing. And I feel like it's been like an upward trend ever since. Do you like looking at your research and looking what's happened to women in the past? Do you feel like that had anything to do with it?
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I think part of it, I think that we can break these patterns because as mentioned, it doesn't happen to men. As we more and more of us become conscious of what's operating in us. And the more that we say, okay, not today. And the more that we sort of, even in the process of crisis, and when this happens, the response of women is typically, oh my God, I'm bad. These people think I'm bad. I'm bad. And you could hear this in sort of Anne Hathaway owning that she knows she's annoying. I mean, just like, I know I'm annoying, whatever, all this talk. And so women immediately go into this, like, I'm bad. And an apology tour, and then they remove themselves. We saw this in 2020 with all these business leaders who had started we don't have that many women who are leading companies. And 2020 happened and employees came out and said, you were mean and toxic. And I'm not suggesting that I'm sure there was validity to some of these concerns and something certainly to look at and learn from and repair. But it was wild how it was like everyone went for the women, didn't go for the men.
When men were doing very bad things.
Actual bad actions, like 10 Commandment bad action.
Well, that they were prosecuted against and found guilty. Because
when women are conditioned and programmed for goodness, you just need to be bad. But when men are conditioned and programmed for power, they can do anything to maintain that power. And we don't really move on from them until we think that they're sort of weak, feminine, a quote unquote pussy.
Okay.
And
I'm dying to ask, because this is the system. And if we were to believe like this is just a system, this is how society is, there's no way we can change it, that's depressing. So what are some of the things that we can do to kind of get
override
now we
our
realize
programming?
Right. Yeah. Now we
Yeah.
recognize it. Now we're like, oh, that is why I say that about myself. It's because I've been like programmed to think that this isn't a bad thing. What are some things we could do to get ourselves into a healthier mental health state and not be like, I suck. I have this. Yeah. I don't know.
So it's individual action and it's collective action. And the collective action is incredibly important because to go out as a woman and be sort of deviant and different and sort of like, I'm like, it is very scary and we're not going to accomplish much. So on the individual level, it's taking responsibility for ourselves and the way that we are complicit in perpetuating this system. It is not blaming sort of quote unquote the men or whatever it may be. I'm not saying that there aren't pernicious men amongst us, but that's been sort of our the victim stance. This is happening to us and we can't do anything about it and we don't have as much power. Okay, that may be, but like nothing's going to change. Superman's not coming. So for us, it's like taking complete responsibility for ourselves, those feelings of discomfort, the way that we're made to feel bad, and saying, I recognize what's happening in my body and my feeling, and I'm going to sit with this and understand it. And I'm not going to project it onto other women and other safe targets. So that's the first part, is just complete responsibility. Then being there with each other as we're going through this process and saying, okay, like we can go on venti walks with our best friends. I do this all the time. And we take turns raging. And then it's like, then we shift and it's like, okay, why are you so upset? Let's like talk about it. Like what's happening in your body? What's happening? What is this other woman activating in you? Is there envy present? What is it? What is she doing that's, making you feel this way? So it's sort of that, again, working with each other and being present with each other to make this unconscious action more conscious. And then it's a question of not only not participating in these cultural moves against other women, because the research suggests that women are as hard on other women, if not harder on other women than men.
They are.
And so it's taking responsibility for our complicity in that action as well, and being, again, present with ourselves in those moments and not perpetuating the problem, but saying like, pause, what's happening? Like, what is happening here? And I think if enough of us come online in that way, things could really start to shift, because women are amazing. I don't have to tell your audience this. We have been outperforming boys and men in school for a century. Yep. We are sort of long distance endurance animals. You look at any super long distance race and women win. We might not have as much immediate strength, but we have more endurance. We outlive men. We're certainly better multitaskers, let's be honest. We're still connected to caring, which men have been sort of severed and dislocated from. We're generally much more in our feelings and in a good way. And so we're like boxers training at high altitude. So if we could actually get on side with each other and support each other and support men too. I have 2 boys. My book is not like a screed against men.
No.
It's about balance, and the world would change.
That's the thing that is so important for people to hear. Because I want to reiterate 2 things you said here at No Guilt Mom. We very much agree. And one, women have agency over this. Like, it is not men's fault that they're doing everything in their homes. They're taking over everything. Like, you have control on changing this dynamic. There is control. There's extreme situations of abuse, and of course that are out of control. But women, for the most part, they have control in this. And the second part is that our men and boys, they are suffering as well, because they have been cut off from feeling emotions and feeling sadness and from their caretaking. And so many men would be much better off if they were allowed to exhibit their sadness and show their emotion, which we're not allowing them to do. So gosh, Elise, this has been the most awesome interview, and I would talk with you for hours. We have
Thank
to wrap
you for
it
having
up.
me.
What are you excited about that's coming up?
Wait, I have to say a moment just for people that are watching this. Her cat is trying so hard to be right
To
in
be
the
in
middle of
this.
the. There we go.
It's
I
what they
know,
do. It's
sorry.
what they do.
Love it. It's the realness, man.
It's a realness. I am in the corner of my bedroom. So I'm excited about a lot of things. I mean, my podcast and newsletter, which are both called Pulling the Thread. I'm actually working on a workbook for On Our Best Behavior, which I think you guys will dig. That comes out next year when the paperback comes out. And I think I'm working with a really good friend of mine who's an incredible coach. And I am very actually excited about it. I wasn't excited about doing a workbook because so many of them are sort of, I don't know, not that compelling. I wanted it to be a process, and we've made this process that I think is very rich. So yeah, I'm excited for the last day of the summer, but your summer's over. That's wild.
Yeah.
No.
Oh,
We're
trust
very
it. Just
thankful though, because it's like 110 out. So our kids are stuck in the house and can't do anything.
It's kind of better. This whole system too is so bad for moms and dads, but this like 3 months of no programming where you have to then it's
have
not
so many things to say on that.
we should probably do a whole
I'm
podcast
sure you
episode
do.
about this, actually.
So many things to say.
We should, yeah.